Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here. If you are familiar with my channel, you may be well aware that I often like to break the status quo and challenge many of the views and opinions put forward by the YouTube echo chamber. Part of the problem with gaming channels on this platform is that they often look at gaming history through just an American lens, which means the internet tends to regurgitate the same regional gaming factoids over and over again. Ugh. Like if I hear channels like Watch Mojo, The No or College Humor mention that bloody stupid American only video game crash again one more time, I think I'm going to explode. When it comes to English speaking countries, my home of the United Kingdom pushes out a fair amount of gaming content too, so most people around the world are now pretty familiar with the epic microcomputer war on my shores, and are also fully aware of Nintendo's lack of an impact historically in this region too. So overall, with the United Kingdom and the United States being the main contributors when it comes to retro gaming content online, we often get the same shared memories and experiences repeated time and time again throughout cyberspace. Due to this reason, it always piques my interest whenever I find English-speaking retro gaming content from regions other than the usual suspects. One great little channel I have come across lately is St1Kas Retro Corner, straight out of Portugal. Portuguese gaming history is certainly not a large factor within the YouTube echo chamber at present. So today, let's learn something completely new and look at the secret success story of the Sega Saturn in Portugal. Yeah!
Ah yes, the Sega Saturn, the console that is often considered as a poster child for everything that Sega did wrong following the success of the Mega Drive or Sega Genesis. A console that flopped in every Western market and ultimately led to Sega leaving the hardware market. Most seem to think that Japan was the only market where the Sega Saturn was well received. But actually, that's not entirely true. In my home country of Portugal, the Saturn was well received, selling on par, if not better, than the PlayStation and vastly outselling the Nintendo 64. So, how did this happen? Why was my tiny country of Portugal such an exception to this rule? That's what we're looking at today. I should start by saying that Sega has always been very popular in my country. The Master System outsold the NES, and the Mega Drive dominated the Super Nintendo. This was in part due to the Portuguese distributors for both Sega and Nintendo. Sega's distributor, Ecofilmes, already had experience in the movie and music industries. And so, when they became official Sega partners in 1991, they already had an established distribution network and the budget to promote their new Mega Drive console. This partnership proved so fruitful that they're still the official Sega distributor to this day, and have even expanded to include companies like Electronic Arts and Square Enix. Nintendo, on the other hand, established a partnership with Concentra, a toy distributor better known for their Mattel line of toys. This partnership lasted until 2009, when Nintendo finally established offices in Portugal. There's a lot of background story regarding this rivalry, but suffice it to say, Sega was a vastly more popular brand here. So by the time the 32-bit generation came around, it seemed pretty clear who was going to come out ahead right from the onset. Sega was still riding high on the success of the Mega Drive, and so few people bought or even knew what the Mega CD or 32X were that they never affected consumer confidence on their brand. However, this time there was a new competitor on the horizon, the Sony PlayStation. And at first, it seems to have been giving Sega its first true competitor in the Portuguese market. Sony had the budget and structure to challenge Sega head-on and the titles to back it up. Games like Tekken 2, Ridge Racer and Crash Bandicoot were giving Sega a real run for its money. But Sega had a trick up their sleeve, a killer app that every kid wanted to play. A game which Sony did not have and was released at the best possible time for the Saturn. You're probably wondering what game could Sega possibly come up with that could compete with Sony's best titles? Could it be Virtua Fighter 2? Sega Rally? Or maybe Virtua Cop? No, not at all. This game was only ever released in 4 countries worldwide. And that game was Dragon Ball Z: The Legend. Yes, Sega was saved by a Dragon Ball game. You see, Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z started airing in Portugal a few years before it aired in the UK or the US. So by the time the Saturn was out, we were well into the Android saga and Dragon Ball Z craze was sweeping the nation. I should also point out that the Portuguese dub of Dragon Ball is infamous for being so bad it's good. In our dub, the villains don't scream or shout, they sing opera. I can't really show you footage for obvious reasons, but I can show you some audio. And the dialogue was riddled with gags and pop culture references. My favorite one being when Pui challenges Goku and Vegeta to a fight, and Goku looks at the camera and says, "This guy has no idea we still have 60 episodes left." So, yeah, we were pretty much doing Dragon Ball abridged before anyone. Despite that, Dragon Ball Z was insanely popular and Sega clearly saw an opportunity in porting the game to Portuguese shores. But now, here's the thing, they weren't the only ones to do this. France and Spain also imported and translated the game onto their respective languages. We, on the other hand, never got the game translated into Portuguese. Instead, we were sold the French version. Not to mention that the game itself is pretty terrible, and it even had some content removed from the Japanese version. If you want to know more about the game, be sure to check out my review on it. It's a bit of an older video, but when am I ever gonna get the chance to talk about this game again? And this wasn't the first time Echo Films did something like this either. During the 16-bit generation, they also imported Dragon Ball Z Buyu Retsuden for the Mega Drive and sold it in stores. What's funny is that both the cartridge and ROM were Japanese, so it wouldn't run on PAL consoles. So when you bought the game, you had to walk to the store clerk and you'd also get a free copy of this. Gotta love how they got around that issue. Anyway, back to Dragon Ball Z: The Legend. The game was pretty terrible, it was in French, and it had content removed. But we didn't care, it was Dragon Ball and it looked awesome. I mean, remember, this is 1996. The console generation was still new, graphically it looked amazing, and it had the high energy of the show. And the game flew off the shelves. I remember going to a friend's birthday party who owned the Saturn, and everyone kept lining up to play this game. Sure, the Saturn had other popular games, but this was a console's killer app, and the PlayStation was struggling to compete with Sega's console. Meanwhile, the Nintendo 64 had a strong launch with games like Super Mario 64, but it was soon left in the dust, and to this day, you're much more likely to find someone who owned a Saturn or PlayStation back in the day than you are of finding a Nintendo 64 owner. The ironic part is that Sony actually could have fought back, because Dragon Ball Z: The Legend was also launched for the PlayStation in Japan, but Sony of Portugal never brought it over, even though they could have. Still, I'm glad the Saturn was so popular in my country, because it made it really easy for me to build a sizable collection. For years, you could buy cheap Saturn games in my country for a fraction of their eBay prices. I've bought games like KO2 Flying Squadron, Shining the Holy Ark, and Shinobi X for as low as 30, 20, and even $10. I still don't own every Saturn game I want, as I'm missing games like Guardian Heroes and Panzer Dragoon Saga. but I did build up a collection of over 60 Saturn games because of it. Sadly, it seems that word has gotten out that Saturn games are worth a lot more money on eBay, and now scalpers are always on the lookout for them so they can sell them on British eBay for up to 10 times the price. In fact, here's a quick exercise you could do right now. Go to ebay.co.uk, search for KO2 Flying Squadron and count how many of those sellers are from Portugal. But getting back to our story, by late 1997 and early 1998, Saturn sales were dwindling down. Saturn exclusives were dwindling, multi-platform games were always bad on the PlayStation, and Sony's console was getting titles like Crash Bandicoot 2, Resident Evil 2, Metal Gear Solid, and Tekken 3. But Sony still needed to land a final killer blow against the Saturn, and the turning point in the console war finally came with the release of one exclusive PlayStation title that finally knocked Sega off its pedestal. And that game was Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. Yes, Sega was both saved and destroyed by Dragon Ball. Sony's answer may have been late, but man, what an answer! It was a new Dragon Ball game that teased enemies from the GT saga when we were still watching the Buu saga on TV, and it looked amazing. Sure, it may not look like much now, but seeing those 3D character models was mind-blowing and a huge step forward from the Saturn's 2D character models. Of course, once again, the game completely sucked. But again, we didn't care. It was Dragon Ball, it was on the PlayStation, and we had to get it. This was the final push the PlayStation needed, and when we coupled that with the lack of support the Saturn was receiving from game developers, many kids ended up selling their Saturn to buy a PlayStation. I remember how I kept begging my parents for a Saturn as soon as it launched, and how I kept saving money hoping to buy one. But by mid-1998, when I finally had amassed enough money to buy a console, I ended up getting a PlayStation and never looked back. And yes, I played a lot of Dragon Ball GT Final Bout, finishing the game with every character and unlocking all the secret modes and fighters. Man, I have no idea how I used to think this was a good game. And that's pretty much it. Nearly 2 years later, Sega would try again with the Dreamcast, but by then, the damage was already done. The PlayStation had established itself as the system to get, and there was little Echo Films could do, though the Dreamcast did end up outselling the GameCube. I hope you enjoyed this bit of my country's gaming history. If you'd like more videos like this, let me know in the comments, and I'm sure I can think of a few more gaming stories from my country.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the Portuguese story of the Sega Saturn. I hope we have made you all slightly more cultured gamers today, and hopefully you all enjoyed learning about a bit of gaming history from a different corner of the globe for a change. St1ka has plenty of documentary style videos on his channel just like this one for you to peruse and enjoy. I particularly recommend his video on Hugo for your entertainment. It is all pretty unique. I highly recommend you subscribe to his channel upon finishing your viewing of this episode. Also, if you know a bit of interesting gaming history specific to your country, then feel free to talk about it in the comments section, as maybe it's a subject or story which can be showcased on this channel in the future. We all know about American history by now, so let us hear what the rest of the world has to say. Yeah! So once again, a massive thank you to St1ka for his appearance in this video and providing a very unique insight into gaming history. Also, as is customary, a massive shout out to all of my patrons who support the Top Hat Gaming Man channel. Shout outs to Carl Johnson, Shizuka Kobayashi, Richard Clark, Greg Hooper, Harold Webb, Synth Spaces, Kevin Fahili, David Mountford, Andrew Bazansky, Atanas Garcia, Edward O'Reilly, Peter Dawn, Retail Archaeology, Michael Keneally, Mark S. Hinz, and all of my other patrons. I love you all so bloody much. Cheerio!